Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
FSN, it's about what's next. If you want to know what's happening, what's really happening in the world, what all of these uprisings, gold pricing, currency gyrations really mean, we've got Jim Willie, editor of the Hat Trick Letter. You find him on www.goldenjackass.com with us now for a quick review, maybe not so quick review, of recent world events. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Oh, good to be back, Kerry.
Hey, so there's so much going on now. Even CNN can't keep up with it if they really wanted to, which you and I both know they could care less, right?
Well, I think CNN and a lot of the major news networks are having a hard time keeping a straight face, reporting some of the blather, and also not reporting some of the main events. I'm wondering how long is it going to take them before they even cover some of the big things, the more important things like Deutsche Bank unraveling the whole system, or even the banker murders and suspicious deaths that I'd rather not talk about in detail, but it's a very big story. If you have 75 bankers, and I don't care what their ranks are, but they're all having mysterious deaths, eventually it becomes a story. At what point does it become critical mass for a story? CNN's going to have a hard time. I mean, I thought they had they did a very good job in keeping a straight face during the re-election in November of 2012, because there were lots and lots and lots of districts that had 0 votes for Romney and 100% for Obama. Being a statistician, I know that's just remotely not possible.
Yeah, what are the odds that that some precinct in Philadelphia votes 100% for Obama and 0 for Romney? It's just, there's got to be one person there who says, this Obama guy, he's just not for me. I like the suits that Romney wears, and I like his haircut. He's just my kind of guy, right?
Well, there were actually hundreds of districts that had 0 votes for Romney. Hundreds. Anyway, CNN and the other news networks, they're going to have a very difficult time because they're already losing some of their viewing audience. Their ratings are going down. CNBC has gone down. They've got to stay in business. So at some point, they're going to have editorial decisions saying, well, we need to cover some of these things.
Yeah, and they're going to have to worry, though, that they could wind up like the bankers if they go against the powers that be. So bankruptcy could be the preferable alternative to that.
Yeah, I had a joke that I said way back in 2006 or so, 2005. I said, you'll know that the game is over when CNBC is off the air.
And we're getting closer to that day, although now they're owned by, I guess, Comcast is the equitable owner of the NBC brand because they bought it from GE. So it's just a branch of Comcast, and now Comcast is buying Time Warner. So you basically have one news source, Big Brother.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's pretty sad. I did a story about 2 or 3 years ago on how since 1975 to today, or actually to 2011 or so, the total number of news organization companies was about 28 or 30, and now it's 4 or 5. So that does not really attest to the objectivity and professionalism of the U.S.-based news networks. Anyway, what do you say we get going here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about instability in the world. And look, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, nothing good going on there. The media would have you believe in the Ukraine that the good guys won, that democracy won, and that we can all go home now and pat ourselves on the back that that the peace has been restored. But from the looks of things, anything else but that has actually happened.
Well, I agree. There's a common theme here. Of these three nations, two have a very strong linkage in the major theme, and that's Syria and Ukraine. It has to do with the major pipelines that supply Western Europe of its natural gas, and to some extent crude oil, but these are mainly what I call the gas pipeline wars. Not in the news in the United States was a very big factor regarding Syria, that the Iran gas pipeline was to have a final port somewhere, I don't know the exact location, but somewhere in Syria at the Mediterranean edge, which was going to be servicing Western Europe. And the U.S. and its allies, the British, Israelis, all these folks, they didn't want that. So they tried to create a war. And, there's another hidden element to it also. They didn't want only to disrupt the gas pipeline from arriving to the Mediterranean. They wanted to disrupt some of the legal rights for the offshore oil and gas gigantic find in the Mediterranean that Lebanon and Syria both have rights for. So the common theme in Syria and Ukraine is pipelines, energy pipelines for supply of Western Europe. This is really the same kind of formula that we've been seeing now for 30 years coming out of the U.S. government and its vast array of security agencies and their mercenaries and whatever, to foment instability with popular reform demands at the grassroots level, cause the instability, cause the rioting, cause a change of government, cause all kinds of mayhem. And, I asked the same question. The U.S. seems to have a strategy to destabilize and ruin the world so they could rule it. And it's insane. There's a breeding ground that I've come to learn for the U.S. agents, and it's in Serbia. It's got U.S. installations there, and they fan out and ply their trade all across Europe, and right now they're focused in Ukraine. It's just insane what's going on, but the big issue, I believe, has to do with energy and has implications with the petrodollar and the stability of the dollar. And the big issue is the Gazprom monopoly with its vast array of pipelines. And Gazprom is the major Russian conglomerate. It's not really too sprawling, though, in the number of different subsidiaries that it has. But it has some drilling and construction type subsidiaries that are out there. But the West does not want to see, the U.S., UK, and Western Europe, they do not want to see Russia dominate Europe with energy supply. So wherever it's possible, like in, say, Cyprus, cause some problems, disrupt the banks. And, the hidden issue in Cyprus was one of the biggest banks there was Gazprom Bank. And they and another bank, I think it was called Sberbank, a couple of big Russian banks were involved in securing gold and making payments in Cyprus. So, the U.S. and the U.K. and Western Europe wants to disrupt Gazprom because what's coming is what I call, I'm not the only one called, a natural gas co-op. And it involves a rather strange group of bedfellows: Turkmenistan, Qatar, Israel, Russia, Iran. That's what's going to eclipse and push aside OPEC. So instead of having Saudi Arabia running OPEC as the petrodollar official station, you're going to see Gazprom and Iran working together with a nat gas co-op that really knocks dead the dollar. So that's what's going on with Syria and Ukraine. And I don't want to get into all the details of Ukraine, but there's a lot going on there. I mean, it's a divided nation. I'll just rattle off some of the details. It's not all Russian speaking. You've got the East, which is basically Russian. You got the West, which is basically Ukrainian, more agricultural. They have two languages. They're always passing laws on whether Russian will be spoken also in official meetings and schools and things like that. You got tremendous amount of cultural, historical, and religious links having to do with, they're now called St. Cyrus, and there's, I think, St. Methodius or something like that. Can't remember the name, but we're talking 9th century, 10th century, and that's what the Cyrillic alphabet is all about. It's from St. Cyril, who introduced Eastern Orthodox Catholicism to Russia. Russia's not going to let this go. So we're likely to see a lot of events happening real soon now in cleaning things up because the Olympics are over. But let me just get briefly to Venezuela because, you mentioned Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela. Venezuela really doesn't have too much in common with the other two. They're an energy-producing state, to be sure, but it's a different story. And what I think's happening in Venezuela is you're seeing a resolution of the post-Chavez criminal cronyism inefficiencies. Very few people realize that their national oil company, PDVSA, or it has 5 letters in it, but it's basically the Venezuelan petroleum company, the natural state-owned petroleum company. Very few people realize that by the time Chavez first entered office to now, their output is down 60 to 70%. And that's part of the problem that they have. So when I look at Venezuela, I see what's coming to the United States. Because when the dollar loses its standing and the reserve currency status, when the king dollar is pushed off the throne by whatever means, and we're going to discuss some of them, we're going to see the U.S. suffer tremendous chaos economically from rising prices, the dollar devaluation, whatever dollar is in effect at the time for the domestic 50 states, supply interruptions, and a lot of problems at places like supermarkets for food, gas stations for gasoline and diesel, and ATM machines for cash dispensation. What's happening now with Venezuela is your preview of the United States. This is a very important point, Kerry. We're not going to get out of this. The U.S. is going to go through a very ugly adjustment process.
Yep. I've felt that for a long time. That's why I started the website and I started the radio show, is to help you wake up and understand that this is what's coming, unless there was a change back 3 years ago, which obviously never came and isn't coming now. And you talk about ATMs, Jim, they're not printing any new cash in the United States. All the cash that's in circulation now, cash that was printed in the last few years, they're not printing any new money. To me, that is a tip-off that something is heading down the pike at us here.
It could be. It could be. I think that there are 20 different factors that are closing in on the United States. The insolvent banks, the illiquidity from vast derivative losses. The derivatives are really attacking the big banks. It used to be that they were insolvent and falsified their accounting and claimed that they're okay with their books, financial books. But now it's coming to the point where they're insolvent and they're running out of cash in a liquidity sense. So the old formula is still standing. Insolvency plus illiquidity equals bankruptcy and failure. So we're moving toward the failure scenario there, Kerry.
Yeah, it sure seems it. And, that's what I was going to ask you. The U.S. and Europe's financial situation grows more precarious, unstable, insolvent, and dangerous by the week. How much longer before the next stage of the collapse is upon us? And arguably, you could say it's here now, but till it gets really obvious, Jim.
Well, boy, this is a a very, very big, difficult question. It's so thorny and many sides.
That's why I'm asking you, because you've got,
Yeah.
you really have the inside track on it.
Well, what I do is I keep track of what I call the primary breakdown factors and events. And, we had a trick. It's not a trick. It was more of a standard method. My first job, it was a major computer manufacturer in the Boston area. My first job was a quality control consultant. I had reliability and manufacturing engineers at plants as my own internal clients. And we had a method. We measured the time between events. And the events that we focused on were, a computer system failure or a component failure if the product was an important, say, a disk drive cabinet. Time between failures. So what I try to do in the last few years since Lehman is mark what's the time between important events. And you can't say, well, it looks like by next August things are all going to come to a climax. No, what you say is by next August, it won't be an event every 6 or 8 weeks. It might be every 5 weeks or 6 weeks or 4 weeks. And then, we're closing in because 2 years ago it was an event every 6 or 7 or 8 months, or maybe 10 months. Now it's an event every couple of weeks. These are like, tectonic alerts for earthquakes. The rumblings are happening more frequently. Or labor pains for a mother giving birth. Take your pick. But here's some of the primary breakdown events. And these are all not just big. They're gigantic. The Cyprus misdirection on bail-in confiscations. Well, that changed everything. I regard that as an attack against Gazprom, but because few people realize the entire Russian banking and central bank system did all of its transactions through Cyprus to the west. All. Okay, here's another one. The German gold repatriation demand. It changed everything. I've got a suspicion that it's somewhat coordinated with China. The Germans and Chinese are working close together because it was after that enormous amounts of London gold were heading to China. So you could get on that for half an hour. Here's another gigantic event, the LIBOR scandal. It changed everything. What it indicated was all the major Western banks were in some kind of a completed loop for systemic corruption that didn't just involve LIBOR, but involved Forex derivatives. Because few people realize that a Forex derivative has a swap in there with an interest rate for managing a contract switch. It's kind of a switcheroony where you've got a currency exposure and you just change that into a loan. So you've got a LIBOR exposure, which sets your interest rate after you swapped out your currency. Okay, so you converted a currency risk to an interest rate risk, and you hit it on your books. And that's what Deutsche Bank is on the hot seat for. Okay, it's a gigantic event. All right, here's another one. The exposure of the J.P. Morgan London whale. That was back in May of 2012, and they lied about the loss. They said it was 1.9 billion. Weeks later, they said, oh, it looks like it's more like 8 or 9. And now it appears, what I'm hearing is that two of the London bankers who tried to go flying out of a 70-story window, one was more like flying off a end of a rope in his living room for hanging himself or with help, whatever. Two of the London deaths had to do with perhaps keeping quiet the extent of the London whale's losses. Okay, well, that has to do with interest rate derivatives. So the London whale sighting changed everything. Where then you've got this taper talk BS. And, we were just 2 weeks into taper talk. And I said, well, give them 3 or 4 months and they'll have their bluff called and they'll back out. All right, another jackass correct forecast. But the taper talk exposed the fact that it's QE to infinity. Now, here's another jackass forecast. Back in 2012, when they had their first quantitative easing, bond monetization, application of the Weimar printing press, as I like to call it. I said, this is going to have several rounds. It's going to be never ending. And of course, I get the flack that says you're crazy. And then 2 years later, people write and say, well, good call.
Yeah, here we are. Here we are, right?
Where we are. I also said, Kerry, that the 0% would be forever. So another, I call it 0% forever. And QE to infinity. All right, that changed everything. QE to infinity changed everything. The whole world now realizes that the Fed must continue to print a lot of money to cover a lot of bonds because no one wants to buy them. All right. Then you had the Snowden files, NSA, another gigantic event, which changed the image of the United States into more like a Stasi East German fascist state. And then you had more recently exposure of NSA surveillance really being part of corporate espionage, with a very important story that came out, how the Australians employed the NSA for some trade talk discussions with the Japanese. So Japanese-Australian trade talks were totally marred after the fact by disclosure of NSA surveillance. Now, you conduct trade talks, you know what the other side is talking about in their quiet time behind closed door. You can really earn an advantage. That changed everything. And now Germany is actually using that to say we're going to change the way we do business with the NATO states and the United States. All right, then you had the BaFin. BAFAN, that's their Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's kind of a combined FBI and SEC. It's unique over there, but it's their financial investigation and criminal investigation arm in Germany. They started focusing on Deutsche Bank. I got tipped off by The Voice back in 2011, and he said they raided Ackerman's office. He was the CEO. And they've made off with a bunch of his files, and he can't do anything about it. He said, you watch in the next couple of years, Deutsche Bank's going to be under the microscope, then in the vice, and then you will see how they are kind of like a shoelace that holds together LIBOR, Forex derivatives, interest rate swaps, and I've come later to learn that Bankers Trust, which was the derivative house for the Fed, was sold, I think it was 1998. I could be wrong by a year or so.
Yeah, that's about right.
Bankers Trust was acquired by Deutsche Bank because the U.S. just didn't want the responsibility anymore, and they were having a lot of eyes on them. All right, so the BaFin investigation of Deutsche Bank, it changed everything. Then you had the Syrian War, which, again, as I mentioned before, was much more motivated about halting the encroaching positions of Gazprom and their gas pipelines.
I want to ask you a question real quick about that, Jim. So basically, the U.S. wanted to bomb the heck out of Syria, and for a moment, the country woke up. The U.S. woke up, and the world kind of woke up and said, no, we don't want another war. And the U.S. especially, I mean, everybody was just totally against it, and pressure was brought on Congress, on the Senate, and it didn't happen. So was that maybe a glimmer of the sheeple kind of shutting off American Idol and all the reality TV and kind of coming to for a moment?
No, I don't think so. I don't give that much credit to the sheeple for waking up. That was more like the U.S. Western allies saying, we've had enough of your shit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Obama, recall, was given a very well purchased, highly paid for purchased Peace Prize from Nobel.
Yeah.
This is, the Peace Prize president wanted a war desperately to, halt the Gazprom pipelines and interfere with offshore rights for a large Mediterranean energy discovery. Notice also that the chemical weapons, which the American sheep have no idea about, they were dispensed by the Saudi, not the Assad loyalists.
Yeah, that was
a
fake.
That was a fake story, and the Saudis purchased the chemical weapon gas supplies from the British from a Bush corporation. All right, then you had the UK government that was in position to side and support the U.S. efforts in Syria, and suddenly they changed because I believe they got a phone call from the Kremlin saying, do you really want to cut off 20% of your gas supply next winter? Do you really want cold homes in Britain? So there's perhaps your first leveraged usage of Gazprom to change some of the Western policy. All right, enough for that. Let me continue because there are just a couple more. Then you had the rejection, and this did not get the proper publicity. The rejection of the Draghi European Central Bank super senior bonds. He tried to come up with a phony papier-mâché solution to cover up toxic, worthless bonds in Europe for their sovereign bonds, like Spain, Italy, and Greece, and Portugal. The bonds were called LTROs, long-term refinance operation bonds. What happened was a German court ruled that they were illegitimate. So
right,
you
I remember
can't very well have a solution. And there's an old sound money axiom. You cannot use a paper solution to solve a paper-based crisis in currencies or bonds. So you can't have a super senior toxic bond take control and execute higher seniority. Okay, this bond is more senior to another during a failure, so this one will be redeemed in this order. And the bottom is your corporate bond, where the investors and regular old people on the street might. All right, so that changed everything, but it didn't get proper attention. So I think the collapse is in progress. It's an unstoppable process. It's a pathogenesis, much like cancer. What happens in cancer is a metastasis spreads to a different organ. That organ starts to lose its function. Then it serves as a site for spreading the metastasis. Oh gosh, I'm not sure of the exact word.
Yeah, metastasis. Yeah.
Yeah, to maybe another organ, to the liver, to the lung, to the pancreas, to the brain, a brain tumor. So we've got this process in place. It's not going to stop. It's very much like, I use the analogy of a Deutsche Bank acting like a shoelace that's untying lots and lots of important different components to the global financial structure. Think of it in a more simple term. Deutsche Bank has a major thread in a sweater, and you pull the thread and you keep pulling. There's no arm now on that sweater.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, we don't have anything that has the buttons anymore. Okay.
It started with a tiny thread. It was nothing, and all of a sudden you got nothing. You're wearing nothing.
I think it's the Deutsche Bank thread, and the Voice tipped me off in 2011. He said Deutsche Bank is key. He said it's the one bank that the Anglo-Americans cannot control. It's totally under German control. And to be sure, there's a German camp at the time, was very loyal to the London crowd and did a lot of their, detail work. And they carried out the Bankers Trust derivative work. But he said they can control the London and New York banks. And, Wells Fargo is, for practical purposes, a New York bank. I don't make big distinctions there. They're, big U.S. money-centered derivative-type banks. They can control U.S. and London. They cannot control the big German banks. I've got a couple of really smart, connected friends here in Costa Rica, and they say, Jim, it's amazing, but there are banks in Nicaragua that have the intermediary as Commerce Bank. And, Commerce Bank is involved with some dirty stuff. But, apart from that, they're German intermediary banks that are doing important work in connecting the world. They're very important, and they're not under London control. So you've got Deutsche Bank with important ties to LIBOR, Forex, the Vatican, London, JP Morgan, Bankers Trust, derivatives, and that shoelace is being pulled. As you see more news coming out of both German repatriation and their BaFin investigations of criminality, Let me just give you one example of probably the biggest violation for accounting fraud that BaFin is all over Deutsche Bank for. And this is not brand new. This came out I think it was about 6 or 8 months ago, when the European Union was forming, and all these countries in Western Europe wanted to get behind the common euro, the European Monetary Union. They had to qualify. Their debt had to be a certain level. It couldn't be greater. It was called the Maastricht Rule. They had to have compliance with the Maastricht rules and guidelines. So what they did was they hired Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs to do falsification of their debts with some swaps of their debt and put it in terms of Forex derivatives. Hide your debt with some Forex derivatives, submit your phony balance sheet with hidden components on it, qualify for the European Monetary Union, and here we are 12, 13 years later. I can't think of a financial fraud violation more important than qualifying for a monetary union among a group of nations. We're not talking about neighborhoods here. We're talking about nations. So I think watch for an intermediary bank, Kerry, a corresponding bank. It could be Commerce Bank. Watch for some medium-sized bank, maybe in Germany, to fail when they're trying to carry out some intermediary function for a giant bank. And the giant banks are just running out of arms and legs. They can't control all the different things that are in motion. This is what I've been tipped off to be on the watch for. An intermediary bank that fails.
And that'll lead to a chain reaction, huh?
Exactly.
Because once one of them goes, that's it. Because they're all interlinked, interwoven, interchained, and it'll be just like an atomic bomb going critical, right?
Yes, and in fact, you called it correct. You said they're interwoven, interlinked. There's a chain. After Lehman Brothers happened, something very unusual occurred with all the major Western banks. They started using derivatives, whether they're credit default swaps or interest rate derivatives or Forex derivatives. Those are the three main types. They're not all equally sized, but they're all very prominent. What happened was all these London, Western Europe, and New York giant banks lashed themselves together. I like to use an old term from, it's really from colonial days, but back in the 17th, 18th centuries, there were a lot of ships, and they traveled, and they had their men at risk on board. They had to, unfurl the what do you call it, the yards, the big sails. Mm-hmm. And they had to avoid getting knocked overboard, because if they're knocked overboard, they're dead. They drown. They're gone. Oh, we lost 2 men last night dropping down the sails.
So they lashed themselves to the masts.
They'd lash themselves to each other and then to the masts. Right. These big banks are all lashed together. And this is a very important point, because once you get an intermediary bank going down, if it has pressure to pull down a bigger bank, a very big bank, it's not going to be Deutsche Bank. They're going to split Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank's going to be 5 different financial firms real soon. If it brings down a big bank, like, say, Barclays, it's game over. All the rest are going to go down, and you're going to have sovereign debt defaults. You're going to have big bank defaults. You're going to have account confiscations. You're going to have no ATMs working for that bank, and then another bank, and then another bank. That's how it works. It's contagion. It's just like you said.
Then none of the ATMs, you can't have one bank's ATMs not work. If one doesn't work, they all don't work, because like you said, they're all in it together. So that's really it.
They've got their networks, like Cirrus and Direct Plus, and there would be some damage. I don't know how all that works, but I just know that if one big bank goes, the derivatives will catch fire to the others.
Yep, which is why they should have been banned in the first place, but they're so profitable in the short run that the regulators just let them have their way because they own the government, let's face it. So So then we get to China, because obviously they're the big winner in all this, but they've got a shadow banking system, excessive debt. Where's that going to go?
Warning, you might live in a no-constitution zone. It's the shocking story you won't see on TV. Depending upon where you live in the United States, you may no longer have constitutional rights. Politicians are quietly squeezing the middle class to micromanage you and extract your wealth. Want to see how? Watch the free video at noconstitutionzone.com. Soon, you'll have the last laugh by using these cultural contraband tricks and profit like a king. That's noconstitutionzone.com.
What happens if the collapse never really comes? You need income, and Jason Hartman can help you get it. He's helped thousands of people realize their dreams of financial independence through real estate investing, and now he's got an unbeatable offer for you. He's offering my ebook, Forget Wall Street, Go for the Gold and Silver Too, for free. Just visit jasonhartman.com/Lutz. The first 100 Financial Survival Network listeners will get the book free. Remember, you can't afford to put all your eggs in one basket. Real estate should be part of a balanced investment portfolio along with gold and silver. Just go to jasonhartman.com/Lutz and sign up today. When it comes to real estate investing, Jason Hartman is the only person we trust on the Financial Survival Network. So make your money work as hard as you do by building an income property empire. Real estate is America's proven investment. Go to www.jasonhartman.com/Lutz and get your free ebook today. That's Jason, HARTMAN.com/Lutz. That's Jason, HARTMAN.com/Lutz. Jason knows how to help you retire with a portfolio of income-producing property. Go to jasonhartman.com/Lutz.
The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.